Hi everyone, so I'm going to carry on where we left off in the last video, looking at the feminist movement and women's rights. And as I said, we're going to start with Roe versus Wade and the fight for the legalization of abortion. So this was a court case where it was argued that a woman had the right to abortion and somebody who was saying that she didn't. So the feminist argument was that women should be free to decide what happens to their own body. Okay, this idea that they should have ownership over that, what happens to their body, and they should not be forced to have a child if they didn't want to. Okay, so it's argued in this case that 21-year-old Jane Roe had the right to an abortion. She'd already had 2 children that had been put up for adoption, and the case did pass. And in 1973, abortion was legalized. So this was a massive thing, because if we think about the reasons that women have abortions, some of them couldn't afford to have any more children. Okay, and they were being forced into it, maybe because they weren't using contraception if they were married. Obviously, a woman may have been raped, and is it fair to let her make her carry that baby? Maybe in some cases they had been pressured into it. You know, this to have more children, you know, by the family or by the husband. Or maybe there's a case of going on with the pregnancy may affect negatively their own health or the health of the baby. So there's myriad of different reasons why you may have an abortion. So it is obviously really positive that it was legalized, and it's a really big step forward for the women's movement. So one of the people who was really instrumental in the legalization of abortion was Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem is still alive, and she is still working for women's rights. She has a really good podcast with Elizabeth Day called How to Fail. So if you're on Spotify or Apple or any of the podcast streaming services, or if you just Google it, I'm sure a link to one will come up. Just type in How to Fail Elizabeth Day, Gloria Steinem. And that's a really good episode. And she talks about why she gets into the feminist movement and how she was treated as a young woman working in an office. So that's worth a listen again, to try and put yourself in those shoes. So she wrote a New York Magazine article in 1969, which said, after Black Power, women's liberation. So this is what we're saying. Formed by or inspired by the civil rights movement, women now want freedom, okay, from the shackles that they were kept in by men in a certain place, and figurative shackles, I should say that. So this also brought nationwide attention to the women's movement, and the following year, so in 1970, she testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. So she's there speaking for the Equal Rights Amendment. And Time magazine published her essay on what a world with gender equality would look like. So she's trying to write the opinions of the women who think it's going to be absolute carnage and they're never going to have anything that they want anymore. They're going to be forced into doing different things. And she says, in women's lib utopia, so this is the ideal world, there will be free access to good jobs. So women are not going to be denied jobs based on their gender. They will have free access to jobs and decent pay for the bad ones. Women have been performing all along. So if we're talking again of the case of the secretary and the writer may be a woman or may not, or if she's going to have the secretarial role, it would be paid better. Including housework. So they want women to have some kind of pay for working at home. They want to recognise that as a job. Increased skilled labour might lead to a 4-hour workday, and higher wages would encourage further mechanisation of repetitive jobs now kept alive by cheap labour. Schools and universities will help to break down traditional sex roles, even when parents will not. So this is the idea of having like boys and girls doing the same sports at school, them all learning science, them all learning maths, them all learning how to cook, them all learning the same things as we have now in school. I know you probably do PE separately, but this idea that you have the access to be able to do the same things. Half the teachers will be men. Okay, I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think that's even the case in this country now. A rarity now at preschool and elementary levels. Primary school male teachers are still few and far between in this country. Girls will not necessarily serve cookies or boys hoist up the flag. So she's talking about the Girl Scouts there. So it's about equality. It's about men having access to female things and women having access to male things. Just everybody having access to everything, right? That's the women's liberation utopia. That's what they want the world to look like. Okay, so by the middle of the decade, the women's liberation movement had inundated America. The changes were so rampant that Time awarded its Man of the Year in 1975 to American women. Their article, Great Changes, New Chances, Tough Choices, from January the 5th, 1976, reads, they have arrived, so we're referring right back to the beginning of the course now, like a new immigrant wave in male America. So they're kind of challenging the norms and the ways of living that we'd had before. They may be cops, so police, judges, military office, telephone linemen, cab drivers, pipe fitters, editors, business executives, or mothers and housewives, but not quite the same subordinate creatures they were before. And this is very interesting because this is acknowledging that they can have these prestigious previously male roles, or they can stay in their previously put in place that they may want to be in as a mother or a housewife. Okay, and it's acknowledging that they can be both. Okay, but they wouldn't be treated in the same way as they were before. They wouldn't be subordinate. They wouldn't be less than. Across the broad range of American life, from suburban tract houses to state legislators, from church pulpits to army barracks, women's lives are profoundly changing, right? And this is a really nice source for you to use as a kind of reference of how people are interpreting the women's movement, and with them the traditional relationship between the sexes. All right, so this idea of men, the patriarchy and men being in power is slowly, and it is still slowly, being dismantled. 1975 was not so much the year of the woman of the year of the women. An immense variety of women altering their lives, entering new fields, functioning with a new sense of identity, integrity, and confidence. So if you were just to look at this source, which we never do as historians, but if you were just to look at this source, it's making a big impact in America, isn't it? In the late 1970s, the feminist movement, it really is driving a lot of change, and that change is being recognized. And when we look elsewhere, you'll see that not everybody recognizes it as a positive thing as this does, and not everybody recognizes it as making that massive a change. So let's carry on then, looking at different campaigns for and against the feminist movement. So I just wanted to show you these pictures because I think they're absolutely brilliant. These are 1950s campaigns I was referencing at the start of the previous video about how after the war, men were wanting to get women back into their rightful place in the home. So we can see here these pictures that are glorifying women working for their men and in the home. So there's this idea of women dressing in a certain way. So we've got the women dressing here as, I'm just going to try and zoom in on this a little bit. It's not working on my finger pinching. Here we go. So women dressing in a certain way. So they're wearing aprons, and look how beautifully made up she is. Yeah, I know when I'm doing cooking or loading the dishwasher, I'm normally wearing my pajamas, and I don't look anything like that, which I'm sure many women don't nowadays. But look, her hair is perfect. She's got makeup on. She's wearing a beautiful dress, and she's got an apron on. And this is the ideal woman in the 1950s, and it's trying to encourage women to look like her and to go back into the home, out of the workplace. And look at this affectionate husband here has bought his wife a washing machine, which she absolutely loves so much that it's even got a heart on it. And look at the way that the men are looking at it, right? Isn't this absolutely wonderful? The fact that she can do their cleaning for them and they're washing for them. So it really is to entice women back into the home and saying, look how happy you're going to make the men in your life if you serve them in the home, because they want the men to go back into their roles, because otherwise what are they going to do? Are men going to go into the home? Inconceivable at this time. Okay, and then the next one, how to measure your wife for an ironing table. I think this is one of my favorite pictures. This is an actual ad, right? This was an actual advertisement. It was teaching a man. And again, look how beautifully made up this woman is. She's wearing the new 1950s style of clothes. She's got her hair up perfectly. And she's going to stand and iron in those high heels. Absolutely not. And it's telling her the husband how to make sure he buys her the right kind of ironing table to do his ironing. So these are the attitudes that the women's liberation movement and now are trying to combat, right? Really ingrained in society and really strong commercialization trying to pull women back into the home. So we do have, however, the other side of the coin. We do have feminist protests against this traditional view of women. So this is the 1968 Miss America competition. Miss America is still a thing. Miss UK is still a thing. Miss World is still a thing. These beauty pageants, they are changing slightly. But this idea of women parading around in basically no clothes, being voted for on who's the most beautiful and who's the most worthy, women start to protest against this. All right, so you can see all women are beautiful here. Another one saying, welcome to the Miss America cattle auction. So that's the idea of, like, when you go and buy livestock for a farm, they parade the animals up and down in front of you and you pick the ones that you want. They're saying that that's the same as how men are treating the women in this case. This is an example of a man who is against the feminist movement. So he wants husband liberation. We want wives who obey. I love that. I think this is I don't love him for what he's doing, but you know, this is a fantastic picture. Husband suffrage, down with women's lib. Sour wife, this is saying, has your wife got something wrong with you? So sign here for the husband liberation. We want out of the kitchen. Women working, meals not prepared. So this is exactly what I was just saying. Are the men prepared to go into the home when the women have left it? Absolutely not. Kids unsupervised, child abandonment, and this is the idea of mum guilt, right? And this is really trying to guilt the women, saying it is your job to be at home with the children. You have bore these children, you've birthed them, you need to raise them. It's your responsibility. If you're going to work, you're being selfish because you're not looking after your children. And women feel that anyway. We don't need to be told that by men. But this is what he's saying here. You are abandoning your child, okay? And that was, and still is, by some men still hold these beliefs, but that was the belief of the men at the time, that women should not abandon their children. When they've got children, their responsibility and their time should go to them, okay? They shouldn't work. And absolutely, if women want to do that, they're completely in their own right to, but equally, they have every right to work as men do. So here we have about the Equal Rights Amendment. The equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. That was the headline of the Equal Rights Amendment, and that's what it should be upholding. And this is a march to support that. But as we referenced in the previous video, the ERA needed 38 out of 50 to pass, but it only got 35 out of 50. So it was 3 states short. And we can see here, and this shouldn't surprise you, knowing what you know about the southern states and the civil rights movement and their Republican nature and traditional nature, a lot of those states were in the South that voted no. And this was even with an extension. They did get a couple of years extension to try and win these states over, and they don't manage it. But it's just such a shame, isn't it? 3 states out of 50, and it doesn't get passed. So we're going to finish off by looking at a couple of sources. So the first one is, again, Gloria Steinem, and this is a speech from her in the late 1960s. She says this is no simple reform, it really is a revolution. Sex and race, because they are easy and visible differences, have been the primary ways of organising human beings into superior and inferior groups. So white versus black, man versus women. Beings into superior and inferior groups and into the cheap labour on which this system still depends. We are talking about a society in which there will be no roles other than those chosen or those earned. Okay, and that's what she's saying the world's going to carry on looking like without feminism and the feminist movement. And then this is a 2001 article by Barbara Epstein, a social history professor at the University of California. Excuse me. And she completed her graduate degree during the 1960s. She says, despite the dramatic accomplishments of the women's movement, gender equality has not yet been achieved. And this was written in 2001. Many more women work outside the home, but most continue to be concentrated in low-paying jobs. Women earn, on the average, considerably less than men. Women are much more likely than men to be poor. Responsibility for childcare remains largely the responsibility of women. In the 1960s and 1970s, feminists protested the imbalance in power between men and women in family and personal relations, but these continue to exist. And in some families, they still do today. Okay, so I'm going to just finish off. I'm just going to leave this for you to have a look at and have a think about. Is an exam question. So in what ways were the lives of women affected by the campaign for more equality in the USA during the 1960s and early 1970s? Explain your answer. This is very, very similar to the exam question that came up on the 2022 paper. So it may be worth you asking your teacher if you can have a look at the mark scheme for that question if you are going to have a go at answering it. So I've just put a tip at the bottom. This question is about change. So the in what ways question is asking you to compare how things were before and how things were now. Another thing that I should have added to this that I'll just add at the bottom is you in this question also need to talk about how different groups are affected. Okay, so also include different groups and if they are affected differently. So for example, are all women affected positively by the feminist movement? No. Right, but which ones are and which ones aren't? So your two paragraphs, you could say this group of women are affected in a positive way, this group of women are affected in a negative way. All right, so the ones who are who are feminists get some positives, the ones who are not, obviously they get some negatives. Or you could do that the other way around with the fact that the ERA doesn't pass. There's loads of things you could talk about in that question, so I'll leave that there for you to have a look at. You can plan it, you can write it. So we've reached the end of the America course now. So if this is the first video you've watched on it, please go back and watch the rest of them. And I really, really hope they've been useful for you. So thank you for joining me and the best of luck in your exams.